Now, as we draw to the end of the conference, it is my greatest pleasure to introduce to you Rachel Williams, who's been sat very quietly throughout the whole of the 3 hours. Welcome, Rachel, who has been a long-standing supporter of our research. Rachel is a survivor of domestic abuse whose story of 18 years of that abuse is documented in her book, The Devil at Home, an absolute must-read that highlights the real and serious threat to life post-separation and the impact of domestic abuse on children. Rachel campaigns tirelessly for change in responses by professionals to domestic abuse victims and the call for consequences for perpetrators. Rachel has been on national and local TV, so if you're thinking, I'm sure I recognise that woman, that'll be where from, and has begun many successful petitions. Her latest success is to make non-fatal strangulation a specific criminal offence. This is due to be included in legislation really soon. I could go on and on about the work and delivery that Rachel does, as she does much needed training to survivors and professionals, but it's now time for me to shut up and for Rachel to give her thoughts and considerations on what's just happened over the last 3 hours and obviously your own work. So Rachel, I hand you the floor.
Thank you, Jill. What an amazing presentation. It's been really insightful. And I think, I've been on this journey a bit with you for about 3 years when I first visited the Ni3UK Research Centre. And I could see then what an impact that this video game would have on young people and children who would play the video game. And it's finally arrived. And I'm so excited for you all. We know from statistics that the number of young people identified as being vulnerable to intimate relationship abuse is high, and it doesn't make happy reading. The impact of abuse on children and young people has an enormous impact on their well-being and mental health, as it does all of us. But I think our concerns are, how do we educate them? How do we educate the next generation? They are the future, and we need to help them live their best lives, and that is free from abuse. So some of you may know my story, but I'm not going to go into too much detail now because it is about the game, which I'm so excited about. But I suffered 18 years of abuse, which resulted in me leaving my perpetrator, who then stalked and harassed me for 6 weeks, and then finally coming into my place of work armed with a sawn-off shotgun and shooting me twice. But the tragedy for me was sadly that my son, Jack, he was 16 years of age and he took his life due to his father's actions. So this was the result of one perpetrator's actions. We know that you don't have to be living with somebody for a toxic relationship to develop. We know that some children and young people will experience relationship abuse while living with their parents or carers. We know 1 in 7 children and young people under the age of 18 will have lived with domestic violence at some point in their childhood, according to Women's Aid. And the NSPCC 2020 said that the number of children living with domestic abuse was up by 25%. I just wonder what those stats would look like now, especially during COVID. And I've been doing a lot of work during COVID and I could see how much it was growing. Domestic abuse and coercion can happen in any relationship and can continue once the relationship is over. I mean, sadly, most children and young people cannot recognise the signs of abuse and coercion, and it's up to us to help them and educate them. Actually, some adults who are in abusive relationships don't recognise the signs either. So by playing the game in the educational setting, this will educate the children and young people, and it will raise awareness and hopefully will start a conversation between friends in their circles and also at home. And I think we learn off kids, and I think if they're going home talking about this subject to perhaps a non-abusive parent, it will actually open their eyes as well if they don't really see the severity of what they're actually existing in, because they're not living, they're existing. It's widely acknowledged that domestic abuse and sexual violence undoubtedly is a gendered issue, experienced disproportionately by females. However, it is clear that growing numbers of young people are using coercion and controlling behaviours, including sexual coercion, in their early relationships, compounded by access to digital technology, social media and porn, which was covered earlier on. The amount of conversations I've had with adult survivors over the years about their children and their worries is shocking. And even though these women that I mainly deal with are survivors, their main concern is their children, and they don't want their children to either become a victim or become a perpetrator. And I can remember one lady sharing with me that in one of my programs, we were playing some of the songs which endorse abuse. And the one song that I played was Cardi B, the WAP song, and it was called Wet Ass Pussy. And when I started playing the tune, this woman was absolutely gobsmacked. She said, "This is what my 7-year-old is singing in the house." She said, and I had no clue what she was singing. Sadly, we're surrounded in society by stuff that almost endorses abuse. I've heard of a 12-year-old child being called a slag on the schoolyard, teenagers being in extremely controlling relationships and also being pressurized into having sex. How many of us can remember, and I think there's quite a few on the call who can remember, you know, that boy pulling your hair on the schoolyard at break time or lunchtime. You go and tell the dinner lady, and then she turns around and says, "Oh, it's okay. It's only because he fancies you. It's only because he likes you." I grew up thinking that, you know, boys pulling my hair because they like me, you know, and thinking that, you know, if your boyfriend or girlfriend is jealous, it's only because they love you that much. You know, there is a fine line between a little healthy jealousy and then coercive controlling and abuse. We know that child to parent violence is also on the rise. Again, I've had too many disclosures of children and young people being aggressive to parents because they think it's okay to talk to somebody like a piece of crap, demand the latest clothes, iPhone, computer games. They're not being taught love and respect, and most importantly, what a healthy relationship, you know, looks like, and especially if they're being brought up in a domestic abuse household. I've spoken in a few schools over the years and shared my story. And I can remember two particular schools. They were year 7, and there was a load of women in the assembly, and there was a group of boys sat there. And I could just see in the centre they weren't at all interested. And I played one of my DVDs called Trouble with an Ex. And when it told them about that I got shot with a sawn off, and my perpetrator also was 6'7" and 22 stone, built like a brick shithouse, basically. There was interest then, but what really stayed in my mind when I left there, and I felt really sad that I could look around that hall and I could pick out those kids that were actually living in that household. You could just tell. I mean, they couldn't even pick their head up, and then now and again they glanced up at the screen, but they were so within themselves, and I could tell you now there was at least 20 I pointed out. Then the next school I spoke at, which was quite interesting, there was a group of girls come up to me after, again, year 10, saying, "Oh, miss, I was brilliant." Oh, and the one girl said to me, "Oh, miss, you're well ad." And I said, "Oh, I hope you don't mean like well ad the dog on EastEnders." And she started to laugh, and she was telling me that her father was abusive to her mother, and then her mother got with a paedophile. So I can feel the sweat coming down my brow now. And then she said, "Oh, but you know, she's with this guy, you know, he's really old." Like, and I think she said he was 50 something, which cracked me right up. And I said, "Does he treat your mum nice?" "Oh, yeah, miss, I know, you know, he's the one, you know, he's lovely to my mum." And then there was a couple of other girls that disclosed that their fathers had been abusive to their mums, and, you know, their mums were single parents now. And the one that really floored me was this Asian girl that came up to speak to me. And she was quite a chopsy girl, which I quite liked. And then she said, "Miss, something, something." And all I caught was stalker. And I said, "What, you're being stalked?" She goes, "Nah, miss, I'm a stalker." And I said, "Excuse me, what?" She said, "Nah, miss, I've been expelled from my last school, and this is my new school now, miss." She goes, "And I just watched that, miss, and that's not right, is it, stalking somebody?" And I'm like, "No." She goes, "Yeah, miss, the police were involved and kept following him from school, phoning him all the time, sitting outside his house, outside his lessons, and I got expelled, and that's not healthy, is it, miss?" And I'm like, "No." And then I thought, then who's teaching these kids about healthy relationships? You know, and if they're living in that violent home as well, they've got no chance. So this is why I'm so excited about this game. Something else I witnessed, which was another eye-opener, and if I hadn't been witness to it myself, I would have called the person probably a liar. But I was sat in a room where there was a very young social worker came in to see one of the ladies who I was supporting on my group, and asked her what was the worst thing that her ex had done to her. So my lady had said, you know, oh, he strangled me and spat in my face. And she's writing notes and she said, oh, she said, was that the worst thing he done then? As if that was okay. And at that point, I felt the hairs go up on the back of my neck. And I said, excuse me, I said, I think non-fatal strangulation is pretty high up on the board. And I said, how old are you? And I think if I remember rightly, she said either 22 or 23. And I just thought then, is this what that generation think is normal behavior, whether it's in the bedroom or not, to be strangling your partner during sex, you know? And I'm so glad that non-fatal strangulation is going to be a standalone offence. Come, I think it's May, we haven't got a date, and it will carry up to a 5-year sentence. And on my website, which is called standuptodomesticabuse.org, there is a specific page for non-fatal strangulation. And there's lots of information on there, leaflets, the signs to look for. And I don't think I was strangled. I couldn't tell you many times on numerous occasions. And I don't think people realise the severity of it. I mean, the first known person to have died through strangulation is at 62 seconds. So we know the timeline for non-fatal strangulation is pretty short window. But you know, the game is authentic, it's realistic. You know, it talks about relationships, sex education programs, and I think what this is going to do is really, really bring the awareness to the kids. I mean, I could go on and on and on, Jill, about domestic abuse, as you very well know.
I
But
know, I know,
I
and
want
I
to
could
thank
listen to
you.
you for a long
I want
time.
to, but before I go, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the Ni3 research team, because I really do think that this game will be a game changer, and I will do absolutely everything I can to endorse this game to get it out into all the schools.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We really appreciate your endorsement, and I know you and I have had further chats about you becoming involved in further bids and research to get the message across that education is absolutely key. So thank you so much for sitting with us through today and learning even more. I know you know a lot about the game, but unfortunately hadn't seen how it had been trialled. But just listening to the young people who trialled it for us is evidence enough, I think, that this needs to go forward, and we will push it together. So thank you so much for coming to be with us today.